And this is what I mean about, these people don't compete. That's for the little guys. That's for the workers. We assembled fuel injectors for Bosch because they couldn't make them at the time. That's how advanced we were. They wanted to build a plant here, but they couldn't do it. And they weren't up to speed. Then Bosch bought half of the former plant that I worked at. They bought half of that plant from General Motors, then moved that plant, and the first thing they did was cut the wages. They did the two-tier. Once they had the technology and the innovation, knew how to make that product efficiently, they closed the plant here and moved it to South Carolina to a non-union plant. This is kind of the mode or the trend. In my plant in Coopersville, at one time we had 1,000 hourly workers. By the time we closed up, we had about 500, producing the same amount of injectors. This was largely due to innovations in technology and automation. I remember one of my last jobs working on a machine that assembled these injectors. Probably replaced 12 people. It was able to do that. And these are, efficiencies in process that I don't know that you necessarily want to fight, because they not only improve the product, they improve the work. They took a lot of the repetitive stress injuries out of the job. In some respects, made our jobs better. But what we increasingly saw was, J.T. Battenberg, actually, I had an opportunity to sit across from the table from him in a meeting, and I asked him about our product at Delphi. This was 1999, shortly after the spinoff, and I said, it's been the trend in Delphi. I've noticed that they've reduced the UAW membership since 1992 by about 40%. Do you expect that trend to continue? He said, perhaps, but not here, because your product is capital intensive, not labor intensive. By that, he meant that the real cost of the product was the initial investment in developing the new product, the design, and then the technology that would produce it. He said that we were not labor intensive, that labor was not a significant cost, that most of the jobs that they were outsourcing and sending to Mexico or China or other countries were products that were very labor intensive, because that's where the savings was. But he didn't see that labor was a significant part of the cost in our plant. But what we saw increasingly was they were building, and for example, we had an injector plant in Austria, a sister plant in Austria, another one in Brazil. We would always have to supply them because they couldn't keep up with us. At one time, we made more injectors than any plant in the world. We supplied all of General Motors. They began to buy, General Motors to buy injectors from Bosch and Siemens and Nippon Denso, because they didn't want to have any one plant to have that much control over General Motors. We could have struck and shut down all of General Motors. They didn't want anybody to have that. Also, what I saw was, at the end, when they began to invest in China, they would bring a new injector in, we would develop it and refine the process. We would, get the machinery and the technology to produce it. And, initially when you start up a product, it's not profitable. You can't make it at an efficient cost. But eventually, as we develop it and refine it, then they would send it to China. And, initially the Chinese manufacturer couldn't produce it up to the quality standards, so we would continue to make it, sell it to China below cost, so that, well, you know, that Delphi plant would, of course, would look profitable, but we would look unprofitable.
Well, you mentioned the cleanness of the plant at Coopersville. Could you address some of the environmental costs that either the taxpayers or the local communities are going to bear because of the shutdown of these plants, or some of the practices by the auto manufacturers in not maintaining clean operations?
One of the, you know, the factors, you know, at the local Delphi plant in Grand Rapids is that they inadvertently polluted the underground water supply. And the homes in that neighborhood, in that area, they can't sell them, or can't get maybe, you know, what their value really is, because they've contaminated. It's so bad. One of the problems that I foresee, especially in the bankruptcy, is as General Motors closes these sites, a lot of them have very serious contaminations in chemical products or asbestos. These closed plants are in the old General Motors, the liquidated General Motors. I don't think that it's been clarified, but I don't think that the cities, the citizens, the people affected by this contamination are going to have anybody accountable for that. General Motors got out from under a whole lot of lawsuits, not just from people injured in car crashes that may want to come back on them, but also from communities who have been contaminated.
Well, in addition to the environmental damage, speak briefly, if you could, about the effect of particularly the older plants of contamination in the workplace, and whether there was really an effort to improve that, or that was something tolerated, and now the worker who is starting to feel the effect of those health impacts has anyone to turn to now that they've lost their health benefits.
One of the hazards of working in the auto industry is that we do work around a lot of carcinogens. Of course, a lot of people, you go down to Dayton where the big brake plant was, and a lot of retired members have asbestos-related ailments. And in the companies, they fight these. Even though it's pretty obvious where they got it, they fight them. But you know, some of the chemicals I worked with was cutting fluids and coolants for metal coolants. These are carcinogenic, and these debilities or these diseases, industrial diseases, don't always show up immediately. You may not know you have it until much later in life. It's not always easy to attribute. All you know is that you're sick and you need to be taken care of, and none of your doctor visits will be covered. So if you have a serious illness and you have to go back to the doctor every 2 weeks or every month or get treatments, presently that's not even covered. In my plant in Coopersville, we had several people who developed brain tumors. It was an unusual amount for a small location. Very scary. And you know, we don't know. But there you have it. There's one of these hazards that you get from working in an auto industry that, you know, a lot of people don't consider that when you work in manufacturing, you're going to be exposed to dangerous chemicals. And you know, the fact is, most auto workers get injured from repetitive stress. They go through surgeries, and you know, their shoulders, their knees, their elbows. It's the hazard of the work.